Sarah Martinez stood in front of her bedroom mirror adjusting the American flag pin on her jacket collar. The morning sun streamed through her small window in the tiny apartment she shared with her mother in Brownsville, Texas. At 18 years old, Sarah had just made the biggest decision of her life. Today was the day she would drive to the military recruitment office and sign the papers that would change everything. The apartment was quiet except for the sound of her mother making coffee in the kitchen. Maria Martinez had raised Sarah alone since her husband died in a car accident when Sarah was only 6 years old. Working double shifts at the local diner and cleaning offices at night, Maria had given everything to make sure Sarah had what she needed. But money was always tight, and Sarah knew that joining the army was not just about following her dreams. It was also about helping her family survive. Sarah had been thinking about military service since she was 12 years old. That was when her older brother Diego came home from his first deployment in Afghanistan. Sarah remembered running to the front door when she saw him walking up the cracked sidewalk in his crisp army uniform. Diego looked different, somehow older and more serious, but there was something else too. He carried himself with a confidence and purpose that Sarah had never seen before. When he hugged her that day, Sarah felt the weight of his medals against her cheek and knew that she wanted to earn her own someday. Diego had been her hero growing up. When their father died, Diego was only 16, but he stepped up to help their mother in ways that most teenagers never have to think about. He got a job at the grocery store after school and gave every paycheck to Maria to help pay the rent and buy food. But Sarah could see that Diego was restless. He talked constantly about joining the military and seeing the world beyond their small Texas town. The day he turned 18, Diego enlisted in the army and left for basic training 3 months later. For 2 years, Sarah waited for letters and phone calls from Diego. She kept a world map on her bedroom wall and put red pins in all the places where he was stationed. When Diego finally came home on leave, Sarah bombarded him with questions about military life. She wanted to know everything about basic training, the different ranks, the weapons training, and what it felt like to serve her country in a foreign land. Diego was happy to answer her questions, but he also made sure Sarah understood that military life was not easy or glamorous like in the movies. Sarah listened carefully to everything Diego told her about the challenges of military service. He explained how basic training pushed recruits to their physical and mental limits. He described the long hours, the strict discipline, and the responsibility that came with wearing the uniform. Diego also talked about the friendships he had made with soldiers from all over the country and how they looked out for each other like family. But most importantly, he told Sarah about the sense of pride and accomplishment that came from serving something bigger than yourself. Throughout high school, Sarah prepared herself for military life in every way she could think of. She joined the track team and pushed herself to run longer and faster distances each week. She took extra classes in mathematics and science because Diego told her that technical skills were valuable in the modern army. Sarah also got a job at the local hardware store where she learned to work with tools and solve practical problems. The job was tough for a teenage girl, but Sarah never complained about lifting heavy boxes or working long shifts on weekends. The decision to enlist was not something Sarah made lightly. She spent months researching different military occupational specialties and talking to recruiters about her options. Sarah was particularly interested in becoming a military police officer or working in intelligence. These careers required additional training and security clearances, but they also offered better opportunities for advancement and civilian job prospects after military service. Sarah knew that education and training would be her ticket to a better life for herself and her family. Sarah's mother, Maria, had mixed feelings about her daughter's decision to join the army. On one hand, Maria was proud that both of her children wanted to serve their country. She had come to America from Mexico as a young woman, and she never forgot how grateful she felt to live in a place where her children could chase their dreams. But Maria also worried about the dangers of military service, especially after watching the news reports about soldiers being injured or killed overseas. She knew that Sarah was determined and strong-willed, but she was still her baby girl. The night before Sarah was supposed to visit the recruitment office, she sat with her mother at their small kitchen table drinking hot chocolate and talking about the future. Maria told Sarah stories about her own youth and the dreams she had given up when she became a mother at such a young age. She made Sarah promise to be careful and to remember that her family would always be there for her no matter what happened. Sarah hugged her mother tight and promised that she would make her proud. Diego had driven home from his current assignment at Fort Hood to be there for Sarah's big day. He spent the evening giving her last-minute advice about dealing with recruiters and what to expect during the enlistment process. Diego reminded Sarah that once she signed the papers, there would be no turning back. The Army would own the next several years of her life, and she would have to be ready for whatever they asked her to do. But he also told her that military service had been the best decision he ever made and that he knew Sarah had what it took to succeed. As Sarah prepared for bed that night, she felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness that kept her awake for hours. Tomorrow would be the beginning of a completely new chapter in her life. She would leave behind the familiar streets of Brownsville and enter a world of discipline, challenge, and opportunity that would test everything she thought she knew about herself. Sarah pulled her covers up to her chin and closed her eyes, thinking about the flag pin on her jacket and all the dreams that were about to come true. The bus pulled into Fort Benning, Georgia at 3 a.m, and Sarah Martinez stepped off into a world that would transform her forever. The humid southern air hit her face as drill sergeants immediately began shouting orders at the group of nervous recruits. Sarah grabbed her single duffel bag and fell in line with the other young men and women who had come from all corners of America to begin their military careers. Her heart pounded with excitement and fear, but she kept her chin up and her shoulders straight just like Diego had taught her. Basic training was everything Diego had warned her about and more. The first week felt like the longest 7 days of Sarah's life. She woke up at 4:30 every morning to the sound of drill sergeants banging on metal trash cans and screaming for everyone to get out of their bunks. Sarah had always been an early riser because of her job at the hardware store, but nothing had prepared her for the intensity of military wake-up calls. She learned to make her bed so tight that a quarter could bounce off the blankets and to fold her clothes in perfect squares that fit exactly in her assigned locker space. Physical training pushed Sarah to limits she never knew she had. The drill sergeants made the recruits run miles every morning before breakfast. They did push-ups and sit-ups until their muscles screamed for mercy. Sarah discovered that all those hours running track in high school had prepared her better than she realized. While other recruits struggled to keep up with the pace, Sarah found herself near the front of the group during morning runs. Her legs burned and her lungs felt like they were on fire, but she never fell behind or asked to slow down. The hardest part of basic training for Sarah was not the physical challenges, but learning to work as part of a team. Growing up as the younger sibling, Sarah was used to being independent and doing things her own way. But in the Army, individual achievements meant nothing if the whole unit could not succeed together. Sarah learned that when one person in her squad made a mistake, everyone paid the price with extra push-ups or longer runs. At first this frustrated her, but gradually she began to understand that looking out for her fellow soldiers was just as important as taking care of herself. Sarah made her first real military friends during the 3rd week of basic training. There was Jennifer Chen from California who had joined the Army to pay for medical school. Jennifer was small and quiet, but she never gave up no matter how difficult the training became. There was also Marcus Williams from Detroit, who wanted to become a mechanic and send money home to his grandmother who had raised him. Marcus had a great sense of humor and could make the whole squad laugh even during their most exhausting days. The 3 of them formed a bond that would last throughout their military careers. By the 6th week of basic training, Sarah had earned the respect of her drill sergeants and fellow recruits. She volunteered for extra duties and helped struggling soldiers improve their performance. When one recruit named Tommy from rural Arkansas could not pass his physical fitness tests, Sarah spent her free time helping him practice push-ups and improve his running technique. Her drill sergeant noticed her leadership abilities and began giving her more responsibilities within the squad. Graduation day from basic training was one of the proudest moments in Sarah's life. She stood at attention in her dress uniform as family members filled the bleacher seats to watch the ceremony. Sarah spotted her mother and Diego in the crowd and had to fight back tears when she saw how proud they looked. Diego was wearing his own dress uniform and Maria had bought a new dress for the occasion. When Sarah's name was called to receive her certificate, she marched across the stage with perfect posture and accepted the congratulations of her commanding officers. After basic training, Sarah was assigned to advanced individual training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, where she would learn her military occupational specialty. Sarah had chosen to become a military police officer, which required additional weeks of intensive training in law enforcement techniques, weapons handling, and military justice procedures. The training was demanding, but Sarah threw herself into her studies with the same determination she had shown during basic training. Military police school taught Sarah skills she never imagined she would need. She learned how to conduct investigations, interview suspects, and write detailed reports. She practiced hand-to-hand combat techniques and became proficient with various types of firearms. Sarah also studied military law and learned about the unique challenges of maintaining order and discipline within military communities. Her instructors praised her attention to detail and her ability to remain calm under pressure. During her second year of service, Sarah was promoted to private first class and then to specialist ahead of many soldiers who had enlisted at the same time. Her superiors recognized her natural leadership abilities and her dedication to excellence in everything she did. Sarah took pride in mentoring new soldiers and helping them adjust to military life. She remembered how difficult her own transition had been and wanted to make the process easier for others. Sarah completed her first overseas deployment to Kuwait when she was 21 years old. The deployment lasted 9 months and gave her valuable experience working in a combat zone, even though her unit did not see direct action. Sarah was responsible for base security and conducted regular patrols to ensure that military installations remained safe from potential threats. She learned to work with soldiers from other countries and gained confidence in her ability to handle complex situations under stress. When Sarah returned from Kuwait, she was promoted to corporal and given more responsibility within her unit. She supervised a team of junior enlisted soldiers and helped train new military police recruits. Sarah's commanding officers began talking about her potential for further advancement and suggested that she consider attending leadership development courses that could prepare her for sergeant rank. By her 4th year of service, Sarah had established herself as one of the most promising young leaders in her unit. She had earned numerous commendations for her performance and had never received any disciplinary actions or negative counseling sessions. Sarah felt confident that she was building a successful military career that would provide opportunities for advancement and eventually a comfortable retirement. She was ready for whatever challenges the Army might present next and looked forward to taking on greater responsibilities as she continued to rise through the enlisted ranks. Sarah Martinez felt a surge of excitement as she drove through the gates of Fort Carson, Colorado, on a crisp October morning. The Rocky Mountains loomed in the distance, creating a breathtaking backdrop that was unlike anything she had seen during her previous assignments. At 25 years old and newly promoted to sergeant, Sarah was ready to take on the challenges of working at one of the largest military installations in the United States. Her promotion orders had come through faster than expected, and she knew this transfer represented a significant step forward in her military career. Fort Carson was massive compared to the smaller bases where Sarah had previously served. The installation housed over 20,000 soldiers and covered more than 130,000 acres of Colorado terrain. As Sarah drove through the base looking for her new unit headquarters, she passed enormous training fields, tank maintenance facilities, and housing complexes that seemed to stretch on forever. The scale of operations at Fort Carson was impressive, and Sarah felt proud to be assigned to such an important military installation. Sarah's new assignment was with the 4th Infantry Division Military Police Battalion. She would be working as a squad leader responsible for supervising 8 junior enlisted soldiers and coordinating with other non-commissioned officers to maintain security across the base. The position came with significant responsibility, including conducting investigations, training new soldiers, and ensuring that military police operations ran smoothly 24 hours a day. Sarah had worked hard to earn this level of responsibility, and she was determined to prove that she deserved the trust her superiors had placed in her. On her first day, Sarah reported to the battalion headquarters building to meet her new commanding officers and receive her initial briefings. The building was modern and well-maintained, with polished floors and walls covered with photographs of distinguished soldiers who had served with the unit over the years. Sarah straightened her uniform and checked her appearance one final time before walking through the front doors. She wanted to make a positive first impression on everyone she would be working with in her new assignment. The first person Sarah met was First Sergeant Rodriguez, a veteran non-commissioned officer who had been with the unit for over 15 years. First Sergeant Rodriguez welcomed Sarah warmly and spent an hour explaining the unit's mission, current operations, and expectations for squad leaders. He seemed genuinely interested in Sarah's background and previous experience, and asked thoughtful questions about her goals for the assignment. Sarah appreciated his professional approach and felt confident that she would enjoy working under his leadership. After meeting with First Sergeant Rodriguez, Sarah was escorted to the office of Colonel James Patterson, the battalion commander. Colonel Patterson was a tall, imposing man in his mid-40s with graying hair and intense blue eyes. His office walls were covered with certificates, commendations, and photographs from his 22 years of military service, including multiple combat deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. Sarah stood at attention as Colonel Patterson reviewed her personnel file and asked her about her previous assignments. At first, Colonel Patterson seemed professional and courteous during their initial meeting. He congratulated Sarah on her promotion and told her that the unit had high standards for its non-commissioned officers. Colonel Patterson explained that Fort Carson was a high-profile installation that frequently hosted visiting dignitaries and important training exercises. He emphasized that every soldier in the unit was expected to maintain the highest levels of performance and professionalism at all times. Sarah assured him that she understood these expectations and was ready to meet them. During her first month at Fort Carson, Sarah threw herself into her new responsibilities with enthusiasm. She quickly learned the names and backgrounds of all the soldiers in her squad and began developing training programs to improve their skills and readiness. Sarah organized additional physical fitness sessions, helped soldiers prepare for promotion boards, and worked extra hours to ensure that all required paperwork was completed accurately and on time. Her squad consistently scored high on inspections and training exercises. Sarah also made efforts to build relationships with other non-commissioned officers in the battalion. She attended social events, participated in unit sports teams, and volunteered for additional duties whenever possible. Most of her colleagues welcomed her warmly and appreciated her work ethic and positive attitude. Sarah felt like she was fitting in well with the unit culture and building the professional network that would be important for her continued advancement. However, after about 6 weeks at Fort Carson, Sarah began to notice subtle changes in how Colonel Patterson interacted with her during staff meetings and official functions. While he continued to treat male non-commissioned officers with respect and consideration, Sarah observed that he seemed less interested in her input during planning sessions. When she raised questions or offered suggestions, Colonel Patterson would often dismiss her ideas without much discussion or redirect the conversation to other topics. Sarah initially tried to give Colonel Patterson the benefit of the doubt. She knew that some senior officers had old-fashioned attitudes about women in the military, and she hoped that her performance would eventually win his respect. Sarah had encountered similar situations before, and had always been able to overcome initial skepticism through hard work and professionalism. She decided to focus on doing her job to the best of her ability, and let her results speak for themselves. The situation became more noticeable during a battalion training exercise in late November. Sarah's squad had performed exceptionally well during a complex security scenario that tested their ability to respond to multiple threats simultaneously. Other squad leaders and company commanders praised Sarah's leadership and tactical decision-making during the exercise. However, when Colonel Patterson addressed the battalion after the exercise, he failed to mention Sarah's squad's outstanding performance while highlighting the achievements of several male-led units that had not performed as well. Sarah felt disappointed by Colonel Patterson's oversight, but she tried not to take it personally. She knew that military leaders had many responsibilities, and it was possible that he had simply forgotten to mention her squad's performance. Sarah decided to focus on preparing her soldiers for upcoming inspections and training events rather than dwelling on what might have been an innocent mistake. As winter approached, Sarah continued to excel in her duties, while trying to ignore the growing sense that Colonel Patterson viewed her differently than her male counterparts. She maintained her positive attitude and continued building relationships with other soldiers in the unit. Sarah was determined to succeed at Fort Carson and prove that she belonged among the Army's top non-commissioned officers, regardless of any personal biases she might encounter along the way. By January, the subtle changes in Colonel Patterson's behavior towards Sarah had become impossible to ignore. What started as occasional dismissive comments during staff meetings had grown into a pattern of deliberate disrespect that made Sarah's stomach clench every time she had to interact with him. The other non-commissioned officers in the battalion began to notice the tension, and some of them started following Colonel Patterson's lead in how they treated Sarah. The first major incident occurred during a battalion formation in early February. Sarah had spent weeks preparing her squad for a formal inspection that would evaluate everything from uniform appearance to equipment maintenance to knowledge of military procedures. Her soldiers had worked extra hours polishing their boots, cleaning their weapons, and memorizing regulation requirements. Sarah felt confident that her squad would score among the highest in the battalion and reflect well on her leadership abilities. When the inspection results were announced, Colonel Patterson praised several squads for their outstanding performance. He specifically mentioned Sergeant Johnson's squad and Sergeant Miller's squad, both of which had scored well but not as high as Sarah's unit. When Colonel Patterson finished his remarks without mentioning Sarah's squad at all, she felt her face flush with embarrassment and anger. Her soldiers looked confused and disappointed because they knew they had performed better than the units that received recognition. After the formation, Sarah approached First Sergeant Rodriguez to ask about the inspection scores. Rodriguez looked uncomfortable as he showed Sarah the official results, which confirmed that her squad had achieved the highest score in the battalion. When Sarah asked why Colonel Patterson had not acknowledged their performance, Rodriguez shrugged and suggested that maybe the colonel had simply overlooked it in his remarks. Sarah knew this was not an innocent mistake, but she kept her concerns to herself rather than putting Rodriguez in an awkward position. The situation got worse during the following weeks as Colonel Patterson began assigning Sarah to increasingly undesirable duties. While other squad leaders received assignments that allowed them to develop their leadership skills and gain valuable experience, Sarah found herself stuck with tedious paperwork tasks and routine security patrols. When she requested more challenging assignments that would help advance her career, Colonel Patterson told her that she needed to prove herself with basic responsibilities before taking on more complex duties. Sarah tried to maintain her professionalism despite the obvious unfairness of her treatment. She completed every assignment with the same attention to detail and positive attitude that had earned her respect throughout her military career. Sarah's soldiers remained loyal to her because they could see that she was being treated unfairly, and they appreciated how she protected them from Colonel Patterson's increasingly hostile behavior toward their unit. The harassment escalated in March when promotion recommendations were submitted for the next advancement cycle. Sarah had been eligible for promotion to staff sergeant for several months, and her performance evaluations clearly supported her advancement to the next rank. First Sergeant Rodriguez had indicated that Sarah would likely be recommended for promotion based on her excellent service record and leadership abilities. Sarah began preparing for the additional responsibilities that would come with her new rank. When the promotion list was posted, Sarah's name was not on it. Instead, Sergeant David Morrison had been recommended for staff sergeant, even though he had less experience than Sarah and had received lower performance ratings during his time at Fort Carson. Morrison was a competent soldier, but everyone in the battalion knew that Sarah's qualifications were superior. The decision was so obviously unfair that several other non-commissioned officers approached Sarah privately to express their confusion and support. Sarah requested a meeting with Colonel Patterson to discuss her promotion eligibility. She prepared carefully for the conversation, reviewing her performance records and practicing how to present her concerns in a professional manner. Sarah hoped that if she could speak with Colonel Patterson directly, she might be able to understand his decision and work toward earning his recommendation in the future. The meeting did not go as Sarah had hoped. When she asked Colonel Patterson about her promotion recommendation, he became defensive and hostile. He told Sarah that she was not ready for additional responsibility and needed to focus on improving her current performance before considering advancement. When Sarah tried to point out her positive performance evaluations and successful completion of all assigned duties, Colonel Patterson interrupted her and said that he did not appreciate being questioned by subordinate personnel. Colonel Patterson then made comments that left no doubt about his real feelings toward women in leadership positions. He suggested that female soldiers were too emotional to handle the pressures of senior non-commissioned officer ranks. He claimed that men were naturally better suited for military leadership roles, and that promoting women beyond their capabilities created problems for entire units. Sarah listened in shocked silence as her commanding officer expressed views that violated every principle of equal opportunity and professional conduct. After leaving Colonel Patterson's office, Sarah felt shaken and angry in ways she had never experienced during her military career. She had faced challenges and setbacks before, but she had never encountered such blatant discrimination from a senior officer. Sarah knew that Colonel Patterson's behavior was wrong and possibly illegal, but she also understood that challenging a battalion commander would be difficult and potentially dangerous for her career. Sarah began documenting every interaction she had with Colonel Patterson, including dates, times, witnesses, and exact details of what was said. She kept detailed records of assignments, performance evaluations, and any other evidence that might be relevant if she decided to file a formal complaint. Sarah also started paying closer attention to how Colonel Patterson treated other female soldiers in the battalion and discovered that she was not the only one experiencing discriminatory treatment. The stress of the situation began affecting Sarah's sleep and appetite. She found herself constantly on edge, wondering what Colonel Patterson would do next to undermine her career and reputation. Sarah had always prided herself on her mental toughness, but the persistent harassment was wearing her down in ways that physical challenges never had. She knew she needed to take action soon before the situation destroyed everything she had worked so hard to achieve in her military career. Tuesday morning in April started like any other day for Sarah Martinez. She woke up at 5:30 in the morning in her small apartment near Fort Carson and prepared for her daily workout routine. Physical fitness had always been an important part of Sarah's life, and the base gym provided her with a quiet space to exercise before the stress of another day dealing with Colonel Patterson's increasingly hostile behavior. The gym was usually empty at this early hour, which gave Sarah time to clear her mind and prepare mentally for whatever challenges lay ahead. Sarah put on her Army physical training uniform and grabbed her gym bag before walking the short distance to the base fitness center. The morning air was crisp and cool, with the Rocky Mountains visible in the distance under the pale dawn sky. As she walked, Sarah tried to focus on positive thoughts about her upcoming workout, rather than dwelling on the latest round of unfair treatment she had received from her commanding officer. Exercise had become her primary way of managing the stress that built up during each difficult day at work. The gym was completely empty when Sarah arrived at 6 in the morning. She signed in at the front desk and headed toward the weight room, where she planned to spend an hour working on her strength training routine. Sarah had always been naturally athletic, but military life had taught her the importance of maintaining peak physical condition. She knew that staying in excellent shape was especially important for female soldiers, who faced constant scrutiny about their ability to meet military standards. Sarah began her workout with a series of stretching exercises to warm up her muscles. She moved through her routine methodically, focusing on proper form and breathing techniques that she had learned over years of training. The familiar rhythm of exercise helped calm her mind and temporarily push away the anxiety that had become a constant companion since her problems with Colonel Patterson began. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt relaxed and in control of her situation. After completing her weight training, Sarah headed to the cardio equipment for 30 minutes on the treadmill. She set the machine to a challenging pace and lost herself in the steady rhythm of her footsteps and breathing. The gym remained empty except for Sarah, who appreciated having the space to herself without worrying about interactions with other soldiers. She used this time to plan her day and think about strategies for dealing with the ongoing harassment from her commanding officer. As Sarah finished her cardio workout and began cooling down, she noticed Colonel Patterson entering the gym with 2 other officers that she recognized from battalion headquarters. Major Thompson and Captain Rodriguez were both known to be close allies of Colonel Patterson, and they often socialized together outside of work hours. Sarah felt her stomach tighten as she realized that her peaceful morning routine was about to be interrupted by the presence of the man who had made her life miserable for months. Sarah tried to ignore the 3 officers as she completed her cool-down stretches and prepared to head to the locker room for a shower. She hoped that by keeping to herself and avoiding any interaction, she could finish her workout and leave without incident. Sarah gathered her water bottle and towel and walked toward the women's locker room, trying to appear casual and unconcerned about the presence of Colonel Patterson and his companions. The locker room was clean and well-maintained, with individual shower stalls and changing areas that provided privacy for female personnel. Sarah was grateful for this space where she could prepare for her duty day without worrying about harassment or uncomfortable situations. She took her time in the shower, letting the hot water help her relax and mentally prepare for another challenging day of dealing with discrimination and hostility from her chain of command. As Sarah finished her shower and began getting dressed in her duty uniform, she could hear voices outside the locker room door. At first, she assumed that other female soldiers had arrived to begin their morning workouts, but gradually, she realized that the voices belonged to men. Sarah listened more carefully and felt a chill run down her spine as she recognized Colonel Patterson's voice along with those of Major Thompson and Captain Rodriguez. The three officers were talking loudly enough that Sarah could hear much of their conversation through the locker room door. What she heard made her blood run cold. Colonel Patterson and his companions were discussing her in terms that no professional soldier should ever use about a colleague. They made crude jokes about her appearance and speculated about her personal life in ways that were both disgusting and completely inappropriate for military officers. Sarah stood frozen in the locker room as she listened to Colonel Patterson describe his plans to force her out of the military through continued harassment and impossible work assignments. He bragged to the other officers about how he had already blocked her promotion and assigned her to undesirable duties. Colonel Patterson seemed to take pleasure in describing the psychological pressure he was applying and expressed confidence that Sarah would eventually give up and request a transfer or resign from the Army. Altogether, Major Thompson and Captain Rodriguez laughed and encouraged Colonel Patterson's behavior. They made suggestions about additional ways to make Sarah's life difficult and expressed their own negative opinions about women serving in leadership positions. The conversation revealed a level of organized harassment that went far beyond what Sarah had previously imagined. She realized that her situation was much worse than she had thought and that multiple officers were working together to destroy her military career. Sarah finished getting dressed while listening to the disturbing conversation outside. Her hands shook as she laced up her boots and organized her gear in her locker. She knew that she needed to leave the locker room eventually, but she dreaded the thought of facing Colonel Patterson and his allies after hearing their true feelings about her. Sarah took several deep breaths and tried to compose herself before opening the locker room door. When Sarah emerged from the locker room, Colonel Patterson was standing directly outside the door with a cruel smile on his face. Major Thompson and Captain Rodriguez flanked him on either side, creating a barrier that blocked Sarah's path toward the gym exit. Sarah realized with growing alarm that this was not a coincidental encounter, but a deliberately planned confrontation. Colonel Patterson's eyes glittered with malicious intent as he looked Sarah up and down like a predator, sizing up its prey. Sarah stood facing Colonel Patterson and his two companions, knowing that something terrible was about to happen. The empty gym suddenly felt like a trap with no witnesses around to see whatever Colonel Patterson had planned. Sarah's military training kicked in, and she quickly scanned the area looking for possible escape routes or anything she could use to defend herself if necessary. The three officers blocked her direct path to the main exit, but there were other doors that led to different parts of the fitness center. Colonel Patterson stepped closer to Sarah and spoke in a low, threatening voice that made her skin crawl. He told her that she had been causing problems for too long, and that it was time for her to learn her proper place in the military hierarchy. Major Thompson and Captain Rodriguez moved to either side of Sarah, cutting off her potential escape routes, while Colonel Patterson continued his verbal assault. Sarah realized that this confrontation had been carefully planned and that the three officers had chosen this time and location specifically because they knew the gym would be empty. Sarah tried to maintain her composure and respond professionally despite the fear that was building in her chest. She told Colonel Patterson that she needed to report for duty and asked him to step aside so she could leave the gym. Her voice remained steady, but inside she was calculating her options and preparing for the worst-case scenario. Sarah had received extensive training in hand-to-hand combat during her military police schooling, but she had never imagined she would need to use those skills against her own commanding officer. Colonel Patterson laughed at Sarah's request and made it clear that she would not be leaving until he decided the conversation was over. He began making crude comments about her body and suggesting that female soldiers were only good for one thing. Major Thompson and Captain Rodriguez joined in with their own disgusting remarks while moving even closer to Sarah. The situation was escalating rapidly, and Sarah knew that she was in serious physical danger from 3 male officers who clearly had no respect for military law or basic human decency. Without warning, Colonel Patterson grabbed Sarah by the arm and began dragging her toward the men's restroom that was located adjacent to the main gym area. Sarah immediately tried to break free using the defensive techniques she had learned during her military training, but Major Thompson and Captain Rodriguez quickly moved to help restrain her. The 3 officers were larger and stronger than Sarah, and they were working together to overpower her resistance. Sarah fought back with everything she had as the 3 officers forced her into the men's restroom. She managed to land several strikes on her attackers, but they continued to drag her toward the toilet stalls, despite her desperate attempts to escape. Sarah's mind raced as she realized the full horror of what was happening to her. These were supposed to be professional military officers, but they were behaving like common criminals who had no regard for the law or military regulations. Colonel Patterson shoved Sarah into one of the toilet stalls while Major Thompson and Captain Rodriguez blocked the exit to prevent her from escaping. The restroom was filthy and smelled terrible, which added to the humiliation that Colonel Patterson was trying to inflict. He grabbed Sarah by the back of her head and forced her to look down at the dirty toilet bowl while making threats about what would happen if she continued to challenge his authority. The breaking point came when Colonel Patterson actually pushed Sarah's head toward the toilet water while laughing about putting uppity female soldiers in their place. Sarah felt the cold, dirty water touch her face, and something inside her snapped with a fury that she had never experienced before. All the months of harassment, discrimination, and psychological abuse suddenly crystallized into a moment of pure rage that gave her strength she did not know she possessed. Instead of breaking down or submitting to the assault, Sarah's combat training took over completely. She used Colonel Patterson's grip on her head as leverage to drive her elbow backward into his solar plexus with devastating force. The blow knocked the wind out of him and caused him to release his hold on her head. In the same motion, Sarah spun around and delivered a perfectly executed punch to Colonel Patterson's jaw that sent him crashing backward into the metal stall door. Major Thompson and Captain Rodriguez stood frozen in shock as they watched their commanding officer collapse to the restroom floor. They had expected Sarah to be helpless and submissive, but instead she had transformed into a dangerous opponent who clearly knew how to fight. Sarah's eyes blazed with anger as she faced the 2 remaining officers and made it clear that she was ready to continue the battle if they wanted. To test her further, Sarah's voice was deadly, calm as she spoke to the 3 officers, who had just committed a serious criminal assault. She told them that they had made the biggest mistake of their military careers, and that there would be serious consequences for their actions. Colonel Patterson struggled to get back on his feet while holding his injured jaw, and Major Thompson and Captain Rodriguez backed toward the restroom door, looking uncertain about what to do next. But Sarah was not finished with her response to the assault. What she did next would shock all 3 officers and change the entire dynamic of the situation. Instead of simply leaving the restroom and reporting the incident through normal military channels, Sarah revealed that she had been secretly recording conversations and documenting harassment incidents for weeks. She pulled a small recording device from her uniform pocket and showed it to the 3 officers while explaining that everything that had just happened was now permanently documented. The expressions on the faces of Colonel Patterson, Major Thompson, and Captain Rodriguez changed from confidence to terror as they realized the implications of what Sarah had just revealed. They had assumed that their assault would be a private matter with no witnesses or evidence, but Sarah had outsmarted them completely. The recording device contained not only audio of the assault but also previous conversations where the officers had discussed their plans to harass and discriminate against female soldiers. Sarah looked each of the 3 officers in the eye and told them that their military careers were over. She had evidence of criminal assault, discrimination, harassment, and conspiracy that would result in court-martial proceedings and possible imprisonment. The 3 men who had entered the restroom feeling powerful and in control now found themselves at the mercy of the female soldier they had tried to destroy. Sarah Martinez walked out of that restroom a completely different person than the one who had been dragged in just minutes before. The 3 officers who had assaulted her remained inside nursing their injuries and trying to process the reality that their careers were about to end in disgrace. Sarah's hands were steady as she secured the recording device in her uniform pocket and headed directly to her barracks room to begin the most important mission of her military life. Within 30 minutes of the assault, Sarah had contacted 3 different agencies that would ensure justice was served quickly and completely. Her first call was to the Fort Carson Inspector General's office, where she spoke directly with Lieutenant Colonel Williams, who specialized in investigating serious misconduct cases. Sarah provided a detailed account of the assault and explained that she had audio recordings of the entire incident, plus weeks of documented harassment and discrimination. Lieutenant Colonel Williams immediately launched a formal investigation and ordered military police to secure the 3 officers involved. Sarah's second call was to the Army Criminal Investigation Division, which handles serious crimes committed by military personnel. Agent Martinez, who shared Sarah's last name but was not related, took her statement over the phone and arranged for an immediate interview. The agent was shocked by the severity of the assault and the evidence that Sarah had collected. Within 2 hours, a team of CID investigators was on the scene at Fort Carson, gathering additional evidence and interviewing witnesses. The third and most important call Sarah made was to Rebecca Chen, a civilian journalist who specialized in reporting on military affairs and had a reputation for exposing corruption and abuse within the armed forces. Rebecca was actually the older sister of Jennifer Chen, the friend Sarah had made during basic training. Jennifer had given Sarah Rebecca's contact information months earlier and suggested that her sister might be helpful if Sarah ever needed media support for serious problems. Rebecca Chen immediately recognized the significance of Sarah's story and drove to Colorado Springs that same afternoon to conduct an in-depth interview. Sarah provided Rebecca with copies of all her documentation, including audio recordings, written logs of harassment incidents, and evidence of the discriminatory treatment she had received. Rebecca was amazed by the thoroughness of Sarah's preparation and realized that this story had the potential to create major changes in how the military handled sexual harassment and assault cases. By Thursday morning, just 2 days after the assault, Sarah's story was front-page news in newspapers across the country. Rebecca's article detailed not only the bathroom assault but also the months of systematic harassment that had led up to it. The story included audio clips from Sarah's recordings that clearly showed Colonel Patterson and his accomplices planning their campaign of discrimination and abuse. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelmingly supportive of Sarah's courage in fighting back against her attackers. The media attention brought Sarah's case to the notice of several members of Congress who demanded immediate action from the Pentagon. Senator Patricia Williams, who served on the Armed Services Committee, called for hearings on sexual harassment in the military. Representative David Martinez, who was not related to Sarah but felt a personal connection to her story, announced plans to introduce legislation that would strengthen protections for military personnel who report harassment and discrimination. Colonel Patterson, Major Thompson, and Captain Rodriguez were arrested on Thursday afternoon and charged with assault, conspiracy, and violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. The 3 officers were confined to the base jail while awaiting court-martial proceedings. The charges against them included sexual assault, unlawful restraint conduct unbecoming an officer, and conspiracy to violate the civil rights of a subordinate. Each charge carried the possibility of significant prison time and dismissal from the military. The investigation quickly revealed that Sarah was not the only victim of harassment by Colonel Patterson and his associates. Several other female soldiers came forward with their own stories of discrimination and inappropriate conduct. The pattern of abuse went back several years and included attempts to force female soldiers out of the military through impossible work, assignments, unfair performance evaluations, and constant psychological pressure. Sarah testified at the court-martial proceedings 6 months later with confidence and dignity that impressed everyone in the courtroom. She presented her evidence clearly and answered all questions from defense attorneys without losing her composure. The recordings she had made were played in court and provided undeniable proof of the conspiracy against her and other female soldiers. The panel of military judges had no difficulty reaching guilty verdicts on all charges. Colonel Patterson was sentenced to 8 years in military prison and dismissal from the Army. He also lost all retirement benefits and veterans benefits that he would have earned during his 22 years of service. Major Thompson received 5 years in prison and dismissal, while Captain Rodriguez was sentenced to 3 years and dismissal. All 3 men were also required to pay financial compensation to Sarah and the other victims of their harassment campaign. Sarah's courage in fighting back against her attackers made her a national hero and symbol of strength for military personnel who faced similar challenges. She received thousands of letters of support from soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines who thanked her for standing up against abuse and discrimination. Sarah also received numerous awards and commendations, including the Soldier's Medal for exceptional courage in a non-combat situation. The changes that resulted from Sarah's case extended far beyond the punishment of 3 abusive officers. The Pentagon implemented new policies for reporting and investigating harassment cases that made it easier for victims to come forward without fear of retaliation. Training programs were expanded to educate military personnel about their rights and responsibilities regarding equal treatment and professional conduct. Sarah continued her military career and was promoted to staff sergeant within a year of the assault. She became a sought-after speaker at military academies and training centers, where she shared her story and encouraged other soldiers to report misconduct when they encountered it. Sarah's example showed that even in the most difficult circumstances it was possible to fight back against injustice and win. 5 years after the assault, Sarah retired from the Army as a sergeant first class and began working with veterans organizations to help other survivors of military sexual assault. She had transformed a moment of terrible violence into a catalyst for positive change that benefited thousands of military personnel. Sarah's refusal to be broken by Colonel Patterson's cruelty had made the entire military a better and safer place for everyone who wore the uniform.